3 of our breakdown of the WrestleMania decades, right? We had the origins of WrestleMania 1 through 10. We had the Attitude Era decade, the one we covered last week. And this is the third decade, WrestleMania's 21 through WrestleMania 30. We started with pay-per-view. We ended with streaming. And one thing also in this decade is the Ruthless Aggression era kind of bled a little bit. So, Brandon, I'm going to start with you, right? So from what I was just reading, the Ruthless Aggression era was 2002 to 2008. So it seems like more of the years were within this decade we're talking about in terms of WrestleMania. But, like, when do you most associate Ruthless Aggression and the WWE?
Well, for me, I think it was 2002 when John Cena coined the phrase ruthless aggression. I think looking back, that's the moment where the business kind of changed for forever as we know it. And for me, it was an interesting decade. There was some highs, there was some lows, and at that point in time, I was in school, so I was in college at one point during that time. I finished that, and there was parts in my fandom when I honestly waned because it was not the greatest stretch for me as a fan during this era. I mean, there were some good parts, but I still remember the forgettable for me Miz and John Cena, main event where Miz wins and this and that at WrestleMania.
That's WrestleMania 27, yes.
Yeah,
that's a little bit longer though. So, like I said, the Ruthless Aggression era is defined as 02 through 08. Now, I guess my thing is
here's my thing though. Here's the reason why I go as far as I do. So I don't even call it the Ruthless Aggression era per se. I do call it the John Cena era because we were all just living in the John Cena bubble at that point because John Cena for the last 20 years, he's literally been the face that runs the place, even though that's an AJ Styles thing. But you get the point. John Cena is just the guy that has transcended the business. I mean, The Rock obviously has as well. But in this particular era, John Cena has, he's starting to get to that Rock, type of trajectory, so to speak, because, John Cena these days is doing a lot of Hollywood. He's been doing a lot of big things. He's been in that business in Hollywood for a long time, but I think he's finally developed himself into a very good and a very strong actor. So for me, John Cena, the last 20 years, starting back in 2002 of that Ruthless Aggression era, that's for me it goes as long as he was active, and I can't remember his last year of being fully active off the top of my head, but that's how I would kind of look at the Ruthless Aggression is when he just said, yeah, I'm going to focus on going in the movies and just kind of going Hollywood.
I think the Ruthless Aggression era isn't that long because, I think he really stopped being full-time probably like WrestleMania 33, 34. This is very more recent. So I want to say the Ruthless Aggression era lasted into that. But
I would say his best, I would say like the deep part.
You would say the entire decade. You're saying even up into the WWE Network days, it was still Ruthless Aggression.
Yeah, because I don't even like the word Ruthless Aggression per se, like as an era, because to me it was the John Cena era. Like as a fan, like John Cena, like minus that Miz match and everything at WrestleMania 27, that, other than that, like he was the reason why I even stayed in the wrestling business because I had other things going on at that time, which, as a lot of us do in our teens and 20s. And, wrestling was not in the forefront, but I stayed in it because of John Cena. So we might not be doing this podcast today if it wasn't for John Cena doing the things that he did during that time frame because he kept me interested. I bought a lot of merch. I bought autographs to give to my nieces and nephews, particularly my nephew that liked wrestling at one point. Now he doesn't, but that's a story for another day. But John Cena, to me, that's why I don't look at it as as Ruthless Aggression per se. I look at it, for me personally, it's John Cena era.
Well, I guess so. With the Ruthless Aggression era, right, it's categorized as 02 through 08.
Yeah.
And 02 as in the summer of 02 when John Cena coined that phrase. So technically, WrestleMania 19 and 20 were the Ruthless Aggression era. And then WrestleManias 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 would also be considered. So I guess 5 years of WrestleMania and the decade we're currently talking about were part of the Ruthless Aggression era. So I'd probably say you could easily say yes, obviously, because you can't really define it because the way we're doing time frames and the way that we're doing time frames with both WrestleMania and the Ruthless Aggression era, they don't necessarily match up exactly. But I will say both, the Cena era for the decade we're specifically talking about is easy to call that the Cena era, because of the fact that WrestleMania 21, the start of the decade of what we are talking about, is indeed John Cena winning the championship for the very first time. But also, too, I mean, don't forget, I know it's not as integral of a player, but don't forget the guy who actually won the main event of WrestleMania 21, who was, part of why they call it more the Ruthless Aggression era, because they don't want to just pinpoint on one guy, is Batista. I mean, yes, he wasn't John Cena, but I mean, he was definitely a solid Scottie Pippen in that era. Right?
I would say it's fair. I mean, that's why he's a legit, legend in the business. Is it's it's not a bad thing to be. I guess, I don't want to say it in a bad way because I respect what Batista's done both in the wrestling business and also in Hollywood. I would say he's almost like the second. Like I would say he's like number 2 behind Cena. I think that's okay being the backup quarterback to John Cena. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say during that time, he definitely, was a huge name. And it kept going back and forth, essentially, who would main event, right? John Cena would main event with because they were always on different shows a lot of times. So, Cena had the SmackDown title, Batista had the Raw title, then they flipped. Yeah. So they'd kind of go back and forth on who was, main eventing. I remember they both had little rivalries with JBL. The first ever pay-per-view I went to was Batista versus JBL a month after John Cena exhausted all of his matches with JBL, and then they flipped show so that Cena could go against Triple H and Batista could go against JBL. So it was like they did that kind of flip to kind of keep JBL, I guess, active for a while. Yeah. Keep him as just this long running bad guy who can't win a match, after he had gone so long winning a match. But WrestleMania 21, I think that was the crowning of what would maybe, if you don't want to even particular say one guy, because I've seen this before, because recently actually WWE released some championship belts and they put underneath those championship belts the eras in which they kind of represent. You could buy them at the WWE shop. And I remember one championship belt, I think it was the spinner belt, if you will, actually said it was the belt that represented the Ruthless Aggression / TVPG era. So I think you could definitely say a good portion of that decade, from WrestleMania 21 to 30, was the TVPG era. It was kind of weird seeing that actually WWE categorize that, because the TVPG era is what us kind of cynical fans call it, you know what I mean? But the fact that they even acknowledge it, we call it TVPG because we're calling it the kids era or the Barney era or the Sesame Street era or the era where it's just oh, this is you say, you've fallen out of wrestling because you're an adult now and it's not cool anymore, right? But so it's weird that the WWE actually acknowledges themselves this is the kids era or the not made for adults era because it's silly and childish. So it's weird that they actually acknowledge it on this championship belt of calling it the TVPG era, pretty much saying this is the era where it was noticeably more child friendly and less adult. It wasn't just oh, we just happen to not have blood, we just happen to not have that, because sometimes you do, right? Nowadays, right, they could have blood, they could have things, but they it doesn't need to be that way. Things sometimes aren't necessarily particularly done a certain way. It's because it doesn't need to be. Jim Ross always said it, right? Jim Ross always said about the Attitude Era, we don't need it to be that way anymore. It doesn't necessarily mean that was bad then. It doesn't necessarily mean the Attitude Era is better. It's just, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It doesn't have to portray. We can tell good stories without resorting to that. It would seem more forced. If the Attitude Era just came back, it would seem unorganic, forced, not right. You'd be this doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't fit the time, right? Yeah. So I was just hoping that WWE was just saying, hey, it doesn't fit the time. We're just kind of doing things we always done, but the way that the audience wants. But the fact that they say, no, that's the era that we specifically went TVPG. It wasn't a coincidence. There was no blood. We were specific on being a child-friendly product at that time. But so WrestleMania 21 to WrestleMania 30, so a lot, like I said, start out the decade, WrestleMania being on pay-per-view, end the decade WrestleMania 30 with the start of streaming. I kind of wish we did these decades a little bit different. I know obviously we're doing them correctly, 1 through 10 and then 11 through 20, but I feel like those like WrestleMania 20, WrestleMania 30, they're like the starts. We should have had those like as the starts instead of the finishes, if you will, because WrestleMania 30.
I kind of like it though because we're kind of ending this breakdown of week 3, like you mentioned, like it's the start of a new generation, which then week 4 next week, which we'll talk about next week, obviously, it's going to be like into the future, so to speak, network into Peacock and everything else.
I just feel because of the fact that it's such a decisive, like WrestleMania 29, the final WrestleMania on pay-per-view, and like we could literally be like, if you watch like a documentary, right? You watch Ken Burns' 12-part series about baseball, right? It literally ends with like the shutting of one door and the opening of another, right? We don't like peek into the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa era before we close the door before, right? So with us, we're kind of peeking a little bit because of the fact that WrestleMania 30 was on the WWE Network, was the first one on streaming, and then we cut it right off, and then obviously the next we go on to that. But
I just call it a tease.
So like WrestleMania 29, we could have closed it right there and said that put to the end of the decade, the end of pay-per-view, and then boom, next, the start of streaming. But we're going to talk about a streaming WrestleMania in here as well. So we'll have to just do what we have to do because we've been doing it this whole time. So WrestleMania 21 through WrestleMania 30, right? What WrestleManias in that stick out as good WrestleManias? What WrestleManias do stick out as bad WrestleManias in that era?
I'll start with the bad. I mean, I just alluded to it. WrestleMania 27, very forgettable. The only thing I remember is John Cena and The Miz. That's literally all I can remember. I'm not even going to look it up because it's not going to. It's to me. I'm like, I want to get that WrestleMania out of my memory for like ever. I just think it was just a very bad WrestleMania. Like that was one of the worst times in my fandom. All these years is like right around then. So like, that to me was just awful. But just a few years later, WrestleMania 30, man. Oh, WrestleMania, as Jerry the King Lawler coined it. We finally got Daniel Bryan, a.k.a. Bryan Danielson of in AEW these days. He finally got, the Yes movement was in full effect. The underdog story. B+ player. That whole thing with with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon and all that. And then, in addition, you had the streak ended. Like the greatest streak in all of professional wrestling, where Brock Lesnar defeats The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, where that, infamous number one, that 21-1 deal, like that was insane. And, that was bittersweet for me because that was the one thing that was like almost guaranteed in life at that point as a wrestling fan. Like Undertaker's going to be at WrestleMania and in a match, he's probably going to win the match. So I still remember the fan that had like the big eyes, like, oh my God, I can't believe this just happened. I think we all felt like that because I didn't expect it. I honestly wished, and obviously hindsight's 2020 and everything that's happened, in recent memories, I should say. Obviously we lost Bray Wyatt, not that long ago. And and Undertaker even said that there's different reports out there that he wished Bray Wyatt would have ended the streak. And it's obviously you can't go back on that and change that. But like WrestleMania 30, just those two moments alone make it such a memorable WrestleMania for me as a fan that it really kind of brought me back in. It was just to me, it was like this. Like I know we were talking about like, oh yeah, WrestleMania 29 was the end of the pay-per-view era and this and that. But what a great teaser that we're doing here by ending this decade in WrestleMania 30, saying the WWE Network is now here, and guess what? Taker's streak is over, and Bryan Danielson, a.k.a. Daniel Bryan, just it was the upset of the history books because he was the ultimate underdog. What a great teaser of what's ahead for WrestleMania, 31 through 39. I think that's great. That's what I love.
Alluding to WrestleMania 30 to look at what we could look forward to WrestleMania 40 in the sense of like fans are not going to be happy unless we get one specific result. And I mean, I guess you can even say WrestleMania 40, right, is the exact result of like WrestleMania 30, where we have a plan. This is what we're doing, but the fans kind of hijack the show, hijack the plans, and this is what we're going to get. And very similar, WrestleMania 30, right? If you remember, right, the plans got hijacked. right? So part of that hijacking of plans was the fact that Daniel Bryan had 2 matches, right? Now, all of a sudden, because they had to kind of scramble and kind of have like a prelim match to add him into this other match, and WrestleMania 40, obviously, Cody Rhodes is now going to wrestle twice. We're going to have 2 matches, you know what I mean, because of this whole big scramble of making sure everyone's included, because just like then, you had to have Randy Orton and Batista still included, but how do we include this other guy? How do we do this? So it's the same idea. Having The Rock included while still having the main event championship match the next night. I will say one thing that's pretty controversial, I guess you would say. If I was to go back in all of wrestling, specifically probably WWE, and I was to say, what are 10 results that you would go back and you would change? You would say that, win or loss, this is a result you would change. This is an outcome you would change. I don't think The Undertaker losing the streak would be in that top 10. It doesn't bother me at the time. Obviously, I was shocked like anybody else. I was like, I can't believe what I just saw. That's a good thing, right? Because, I again, you forget that feeling. It's like when you're on a roller coaster and you go down and you're like, I was scared out of my mind. I didn't want to do it. It was horrible. You're like, great. That means the roller coaster worked, right? If it just was a boring ride, right, it wouldn't have done what it was supposed to do. So yes, the shock, the awe, the factor, right? Whether you liked it or you didn't like it, the fact of the matter is we are talking about it, right? So I mean, and looking back on it, to be fair, and I understand the whole issue right now with Brock Lesnar and stuff like that, but to be fair, looking back on it, there were a lot of people in the years prior to that everyone was rumoring was going to end the streak. And while it may seem right now that Brock Lesnar in the heat of the current moment may not have been the best because of what's going on now, I think it was a better pick than some of the other ones they were picking, because the idea was that Undertaker was going to lose the streak to someone who was an up-and-comer, someone who was somebody who was going to give the big push to, essentially, right? And a lot of people were saying Cody Rhodes. A lot of people were saying Ted DiBiase Jr., right? And looking back on it, right, it would have been for nothing, right? Because Ted DiBiase Jr. thought he was the next big star, thought give him the push, right? Yeah, exactly. Didn't end up panning out the way we thought he was going to pan out.
One guy hasn't panned out in the other senses too outside the wrestling world either. So
because a lot of people have these big, a lot of people, like I say, when they're coming into the WWE, there's a lot of these prospects where a lot of people think this guy's going to get this big push. This guy's going to have another one, Mr. Kennedy, right, in that period of time, right? People thought maybe he should be the one to end the streak because that's going to give him the momentum he needs.
Dude, think of it now. Think of like we're the current state of, obviously we're going to get to a little bit more later as we lead up to WrestleMania 40, but like the Chosen One, like Drew McIntyre was supposed to be that big thing. It didn't pan out in his first run. He goes and retools and comes back, and now he's got a title match at Mania and in front of people this time. So like, I'm just, when you think about it that way, like, the Kennedys, Mr. Kennedy, and then, Ted DiBiase Jr., those things didn't pan out, but I'm so glad Drew McIntyre, he left, did something else, retooled, came back, and now he's a star again, which we'll get to that in a little bit.
So, yeah, I think if The Undertaker would have lost to those guys, it might have been like because a lot of people are saying, I think it's going to be one of these guys. I think it's going to be one of these up-and-comers.
So you're telling me you wouldn't rather have Bray Wyatt?
Well, I guess my thing is, so here's the deal, right? What difference today would that really make, right?
I think it'd be a huge thing because of the state of where we're in now. Obviously we lost Bray, which obviously was very unexpected and tragic, sad, you name it. Like, it was just unfortunate. And and as wrestling fans, we're coming up on that Peacock special that's going to be happening where the Undertaker, is going to be, I believe, narrating that. So it's, to me, it's like it would have been like the passing of the torch for me because of the ominous characters that they both, Undertaker was and obviously Bray was. That would have been, to me, the better passing of the torch.
Yeah,
I don't have regrets in wrestling though. Like, it's, to me, like, you can't go back. But like, if there was one thing that I could say, yeah, I'd like to change that, I would go with that.
Yeah,
but again,
I agree. I feel like that might be a little bit better. I guess in the end of the day, though, right? I think the one thing that Brock Lesnar did, right? So one, we were shocked that the streak ended, right? But also at the same time, he is somewhat convincible that he could beat The Undertaker, right? And they've had the matches in the 4. So you did have someone convincing that could beat him, but also at the same time shocking. Now, the Bray Wyatt would have might have had the issue where the shock factor might not have been as big because of the fact that the reason nobody thought Brock Lesnar was winning that was because of the fact that we thought the streak is either going to continue or it's going to lose to someone who they're going to give a push to. So the fact that it happened to just Brock Lesnar in the middle of just traditional Brock Lesnar being Brock Lesnar was the shock and the surprise. So the shock might have been a little bit less if it came to someone they were giving a push to. Like, I would have been shocked less if like a Ted DiBiase beat The Undertaker, because that's what we were kind of leaning towards happening. Now, when we got to WrestleMania 30, I was under the impression the streak was not going to end, because I thought his last real gasp of someone beating him for it was the year prior, CM Punk. And when CM Punk didn't beat him, then I was like, the streak's going to stay intact. I don't see anybody beating him. Yeah. So Brock Lesnar was a real shocker, because Brock Lesnar was very similar to how we saw like John Cena versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 34 in like a random, like, okay, this is happening for no real good reason, right? Like John Cena's already well established. The Undertaker's well established. So this isn't like anymore. Like The Undertaker doesn't need to be here. This isn't like a storyline he needs to see through before his career is over. So, and Brock Lesnar was the same exact way. This was like, oh, okay, they're fighting again because they're just putting them on the card. There's really no good reason to like kind of throw these guys together. It would just be like if Batista came back right now and took on somebody, Rey Mysterio. You're like, okay, I guess, why not? They're big names, throw them together. Yeah, sure. So that's what part of the surprise, because you're like, well, he's not going to lose to him, because this isn't even like a real kind of organic storyline kind of thing. I don't think Brock Lesnar even mentioned the streak at all, like in the build-up of being like the one who was going to do it. I think he might have briefly.
I want to circle back to what you said about a minute or two ago, and it was the part where, like, okay, for you as a fan, you were like, okay, well, CM Punk didn't win the previous WrestleMania, then okay, it's definitely not ending at this point. Maybe it's a forever thing. That's what makes it, to me, like, say, okay, if that's your thought process, then who would ever upset Undertaker in WrestleMania and end the streak? That's, to me, it would have been perfect for a Bray Wyatt, at WrestleMania 31.
No, I agree. Yeah, yes, that's why it would have been less of a surprise if it was like an up and comer or somebody like that to do it, right? That's why it was such a shock.
But it would have. And the other thing too is it would have not only passed the torch, but Bray was already a star at that point. It would have. To me, it would have put him in another stratosphere. Like I just sometimes, like, when you think about these things, it's like, what could have been with Bray Wyatt after he beats Taker and ends the streak, kind of a thing. Like, that would have been so cool. I mean, I guess it's one of those what ifs in wrestling. But to me, you know what? Like, it played out the way that it did. And, it was still a really, WrestleMania 30 was my favorite of this timeline because of not only Taker's streak ending, but also the Yeselmania with Daniel Bryan's victory against Randy and Batista.
One person I want to mention outside the Undertaker, but when we talk about people getting big pushes, WrestleMania 29, I remember very vividly, and this is kind of ties into the streak a little bit, is that one guy I thought was going to get pushed to the moon. I think his first ever match, right? It might have had a match on Raw, but his first big match, definitely on pay-per-view, was at WrestleMania 29. And I don't know what it was, but everybody was buying into it for the 1 month it was, because he immediately had a match with Chris Jericho, and that's Fandango. Yeah. Fandango at WrestleMania 29. I remember because I was at WrestleMania 29, and I remember being like, this is like the birth of, like, this guy's just showed up on the scene like a month or two earlier. He's going right after Jericho. Like, this is going to be a champion for sure.
What happened there, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, that could have been somebody who they could have put in, they tried strapping the Rocket to and beating The Undertaker or something like that. And as you clearly see, right, I went into WrestleMania 29 wondering if, like, Jericho and Fandango was going to be the show stealer of that night. I was like, this is probably going to be the match of the night right here. Like, that kind of hype that guy had.
It still wasn't a bad match, though.
No, I mean, just in general, though, like, looking back at Fandango and what his career's been, I mean, I've personally been very close to him in a middle school gymnasium. You know what I mean? Kind of thing.
You wouldn't think, if you go back, like you said, though, like, if you went back to that night after he beats Jericho, you're not thinking to yourself, just, a handful of years later, you're like, oh, he's in a middle school gym now. Like, you wouldn't have thought.
No, I thought literally, like, this guy, he's immediately, his first match in WWE is at WrestleMania with Chris Jericho. and he's going to put on, like, this is going to be one of those memorable things that we remember. That's what I remember going into that Mania. It's like the match I was looking forward to, because I think John Cena and The Rock and the other things were a little kind of forced, right? So that was the match. I was like, well, this is kind of like the tell into the future, at least a little bit, kind of gets me hope for the future. I kind of looked at that more than I looked at the debut of The Shield at that pay-per-view kind of thing. Little did I know that I should have been paying more attention to that. But probably one of my favorite WrestleManias from this decade, right? I attended two in this decade. My first WrestleMania ever was WrestleMania 23, right? Ford Field, Donald Trump with Umaga, Donald Trump with Bobby Lashley and Vince McMahon with Umaga. That's just crazy to think about nowadays, but at the time that was huge.
I know.
I think WrestleMania 23 got like amazing numbers because of all of that. I think it was like the most bought WrestleMania of all time at that point. I do remember, though, WrestleMania 22, Chicago, the last one to this day that was just held in an arena. And it's kind of funny we're doing this list because it was just a couple days ago that Monday Night Raw was in the same arena in Chicago in front of probably a bigger crowd, or maybe very similar to that WrestleMania of like 15, 16,000 people. But WrestleMania 22, I thought, gave me everything you would want when it comes to wrestling, right? It's not a 6-hour show. I thought, for what it was, the set was great. It was an arena, but it was a cool set for what it was. They made sure to even decorate the arena, I liked, with like the banners for all of the wrestlers all around the ring. So it really looked like what you're used to when you see like a home team have a stadium and arena. They did that for WrestleMania. I've never seen that before. I've seen the set, I've seen the ring, but I've never seen them like cover up banners in the arena of like sports teams with their own thing. So like literally you look all around the whole thing and there's Bobby Lashley, Umaga, Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan, like all these people in these massive banners. I don't know where they are today. I imagine they're in the warehouse, because I think the issue was with the arena they ran. They didn't run the All-State Arena or the United Center, and we all know that. They run the smaller All-State Arena in Rosemont. It's more of like a minor league arena that they ran for WrestleMania, and all the banners that they have there are for the Chicago Wolves and for DePaul Blue Demons, which, to be fair, again, aren't the Bulls and the Blackhawks. So they kind of covered up those banners of like the college basketball team who plays here and the minor league hockey team, because it's WrestleMania, for God's sakes, and from here on out WrestleMania is going to be in stadiums. So if we're going to be next year in the home of Super Bowl venues, then maybe in the year that we're in the home of minor league hockey, we should probably dress it up a little bit better. And it's kind of funny too, because it's weird to think about. I know, obviously, the other day we went to GCW show, and before that we went to a minor league hockey game, and so it's hard to think that that was in this decade we're talking about, an arena just like that where we were watching hockey. Literally, because it's the same level of hockey. It's like the same level, the same opponents. Like they play each other all the time, both Chicago Wolves and Rochester Americans. But that arena that we were in for a Sunday afternoon minor league hockey game was a WrestleMania host, essentially. Yeah. But in Rochester, in a bigger city in Chicago versus Rochester. Yeah. But the same arena, the same look, the same everything, same idea, right? Obviously, Rochester's arena doesn't have the wrestling lineage that arena does out there at Rosemont, Illinois. But the point is, I think that WrestleMania had it all. I mean, you had the crowning of Rey Mysterio after the death of Eddie Guerrero. That was very symbolic and very cool. You had, I thought, really cool entrances. Both guys, as we mentioned in previous videos, the main event, both guys get an elaborate entrance. Triple H with the Conan the Barbarian entrance, John Cena with the mobster gangster entrance, where a young CM Punk, prior to his WWE debut, was part of that entrance. You got the ECW match, the one in which was way better than anything ECW ever delivered on, with Edge and Mick Foley with the flaming table. I'm going to say that's the only flaming table in WrestleMania history. I don't even know of another time in WWE history, they pulled out the flaming table gimmick. So that was pretty cool. I did like the Vince versus Shane stuff. Got a little hardcore with that, with like Shane jumping off of the ladder. Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels, not Shane, but Shawn Michaels jumping off the ladder.
Shane was with him. Shane was with him.
So you had the mix of like Vince McMahon.
You missed it though. You missed the biggest match of the night, which was the Playboy pillow fight.
Oh, I was gonna. I mean, at the time, I
At
can
the
tell
time.
you, my eyes were indeed on that match. I think was Ashley Mazzaro in that match or
No,
Candice
no,
Michelle?
Tori Wilson, and Candice Michelle.
Candice Michelle. I mean, yeah, obviously, like my eyes were on that. And hey, that was a big deal at the time because you forget, Playboy. We talk about nowadays with all this branding with Slim Jims and all this other stuff. I mean, Playboy at the time, that's a big brand, right? So to have
Yeah.
that brand on your pay per view, you know what I mean? It was a big deal. It was like the same as if Sports
Hey,
Illustrated or
there was
or
another
something.
female. There was another women's match
Uh,
with two great,
and
great.
that one is memorable. The one you're about to
Yeah,
mention.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
Trish Stratus and Mickey James. Like that was those two females, those two ladies. They did a great job. That was a good, almost a 10-minute match. It was a quality. That was a quality match. It's this wasn't a bad show for
I
for what
think
it was.
that match you're talking about, that women's match, might have been one of the best women's matches at WrestleMania, probably up until we got to the Divas Revolution, right? Up until we got to like WrestleMania 32.
Yeah,
That would have been, if you were to go WrestleMania 32, obviously the women's matches from then on have been great and have been an
yeah,
integral part of the show. But
yeah, yeah.
WrestleMania 22, like if you're looking for like the best women's match of that entire decade, it's really just that. I don't even know if there's any other competition,
Yeah.
when it comes to that. That's it right there. Mickey James and Trish Stratus with that. I mean, I just really enjoyed that WrestleMania. I thought it had a little bit of everything. POD, with the entrance for Rey Mysterio. I think it just had a little bit of everything. Both, like the Vince McMahon getting involved, because I used to love Vince McMahon getting involved in WrestleMania, whether it's WrestleMania 17 against Shane, or this against Shawn Michaels, or later on in the decade against Bret Hart. I kind of liked that involvement. Now, obviously, we're not looking for big time wrestling there, but I just think he was entertaining and provided like that boss that what we got with Stone Cold versus Vince back in the day. That kind of cool gimmick. That you get at WrestleMania. Vince, I feel like, was like a WrestleMania special attraction in his own right at those times when he'd compete.
Sure.
Right. So you had that. I just thought it was a good WrestleMania. WrestleMania 23, I attended it. I had a great time. I do think the match of that one was definitely Undertaker continuing the streak against Batista. I think his streak was in jeopardy because in back-to-back years, Undertaker was in a match for the championship, and where it was championship or streak, which is he gonna lose? You know what I mean? And he won both championships, beating Batista in 23 and beating Edge in the main event of 24. WrestleMania 24, obviously, Shawn Michaels ending the career essentially of Ric Flair. I mean, that was memorable, right? WrestleMania 25, I think. I recently did a video of the top 40 matches of WrestleMania history. I posted on our channel, and I will tell you, I can get you number one. It's WrestleMania 25. Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker. That's the best match in WrestleMania history in my eyes. And very similar to the streak, right? And why I like this match so much is because it was organic. Anybody who's out there saying that Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker should have main evented that show, because it was better than Triple H versus Randy Orton, I'll give you that. But it shouldn't have main evented, because when it main events it gives away what it's going to be, right? Next year,
Sure.
Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker main evented in the career versus streak match at WrestleMania 26. And that kind of gave it away that it was going to be a main event caliber match. And it had the storyline for it. And we kind of knew what we were getting. But what was awesome at WrestleMania 25 is in the middle of the card, we're expecting a decent match. And then we're pleasantly surprised. We're not saying, well, it's going to be a great match because that's how they built it. That's how it's going to be. We were pleasantly surprised that this was the match. Like, it's one of those things where we all remember, right, the greatest wrestling match of all time, Randy Orton versus Edge. That's how they booked it. It wasn't that, but that's how they booked it. But if it ended up being that, it would have been that. And we would have been like, well, that's how they booked it. So it's more to be great to be pleasantly surprised. It's more to watch WrestleMania and to see something and it to unfold in front of our eyes and not just be predictable, right? We like those championship where someone wins the title and you're like, I didn't see that coming. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So this was awesome. In the middle of the show, they're going to put on a good match, as they always do. And then they literally, after it was over, we're all looking around going, that was the greatest match in WrestleMania history. None of us thought that going in, right? And that's why it was awesome. That's kind of why, like with the Brock Lesnar ending the Undertaker streak, you know what I mean? I literally remember the Undertaker losing a streak. He got F5'd for like the 5th time in that match. And I'm literally sitting there thinking, like, really? Come on now. Like, you're going to make Brock Lesnar look weak like this? And I remember, like, the person be like, what do you mean? Like, they're going to have him put 5 F5s on the Undertaker. I think it might have been 3 F5s. And still kick out. Like, they're going to, I mean, because he's obviously winning. The Undertaker's obviously winning. So at least show some respect to Brock Lesnar. Obviously, the Undertaker's winning this match, but it would be nice if you at least, showed some respect. That's all I'm saying. And then he didn't kick out, and I was like, oh my goodness, like wow.
And you're like, oh, this
So
really happened. Yeah.
yeah,
No, I got to ask you though, who is your MVP of this timeline?
you know, my MVP of this timeline, I would have to give it to John Cena, right? Because he was in every WrestleMania.
Yeah, I mean, I already said it earlier when I went on that John Cena rant for a little bit, I guess. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with John Cena. I mean, just not that these factoids really matter when it comes. I mean, it's all opinion based, anyways. But like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, most popular wrestler in 2004, 2005, 2007, 2012, and he was essentially a constant in those rankings during this and that 10-year period. Like he was just that popular. Like to me, he was that decade. That's why I call it it's the John Cena era, So I think we agree on that. I'll leave it at that. Maybe we'll see John Cena at WrestleMania 40. There's a lot of rumors going on that, hey, maybe he's there.
So yeah, no, I mean, I think John Cena obviously was the player of that. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, the Undertaker was an integral part of WrestleMania all that time too. And you know what's crazy to think when you talk about John Cena being the MVP is the fact that he was actually scheduled to miss one WrestleMania in that decade, but then the surprise return at the Royal Rumble in 2008. So he ended up making WrestleMania 24 after all. So he definitely won the title to kick off this decade. And then you fast forward, and he's there at WrestleMania 30 going against Bray Wyatt, and he's there at every WrestleMania in between. Obviously had the big match against Rock. I'm not going to lie to you. So, we talk about our favorite WrestleManias and our favorite things. I will say WrestleMania 28, Rock and Cena. Now, I understand a lot of people, they're cynical wrestling fans, but I try to be as boyhood and as, childlike sometimes when it comes to the excitement of WrestleMania and the excitement of WWE and really buying into what they're selling. I know, obviously, like I said, getting older, people are cynical. They're all just like, yeah, well, it is what it is. You know what I mean? And we kind of like look back at things trying to be like, yeah. And what I mean by that specifically, too, is like WrestleMania 32, for example, right? I was at WrestleMania 32. And I remember when Shane McMahon jumped off the cell through the announce table with The Undertaker and that whole match. And I remember just being like, that's awesome. This is so cool. Like, oh, yeah. And like some guy next to me was literally like, yeah, well, you should have saw NXT TakeOver with Shinsuke Nakamura like on Friday night. That was way better. And it's like, come on, yeah, I get it. Yeah,
just shut up and enjoy the show.
Yeah, this isn't New Japan, okay? You know what I mean? But I get it. That this isn't supposed to be that. It's just supposed to be a mix of. See, me, WrestleMania is a mix of wrestling and some of the fun that goes with it. I don't expect the Dave Meltzers or anybody who does 5-star wrestling matches to pick out any match from this upcoming WrestleMania card and say that is going to be your match of the year, right? I don't expect that, and I don't care because that's not what I'm expecting going in, right? The Rock isn't going to wrestle in the main event for 55 minutes with like all flips off the top rope. I don't expect that, right? So I do like
WrestleMania is the epitome of sports and entertainment. That's what it's all about.
Yes, I remember. I will say I remember a couple of WrestleManias in the decade we're talking about where like the lead off where they would say like, and now WWE presents the biggest event in entertainment, where they even took out the sports part. I think it was like WrestleMania 27 they did that. But where I'm alluding to is Rock and Cena WrestleMania 28. I bought into that hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, I knew we weren't going to get the greatest wrestling match of all time. I didn't care. I cared about the hype. I cared about the build-up. I cared about the video package. I cared about the MGK with John Cena and the Flow Rider with The Rock. I cared about the little documentary they made like a week earlier, the build-up, like right after Monday Night Raw was over, the 1-hour documentary, talking about The Rock growing up in wrestling and John Cena growing up and just that kind of – I don't know how to best equate it, but Monday Night Football way back in the day. Remember the beginning when they showed you one helmet, then they showed you the other helmet, and then they showed the helmet squish in the middle, like that's what I like to see in WWE. I like that build. I like that. Yeah, sure. When you get to football and when you get to wrestling, it is just what it is, what we're all used to seeing. But like I like that build. I like that anticipation. I like that the drama and the importance that is placed on it, right? WrestleMania 17, the previous decade of what we're talking about, Rock and Austin, I love that match. I don't remember a lot about the match. I just remember the build, right? So it's a lot about the build. It's a lot about the music video package that they play. It's a lot about the poster. It's a lot about all of that stuff. It's a lot about the commercial. And shout out, because I actually saw somebody today on X/Twitter. They were taking a bunch of matches from this upcoming WrestleMania 40, and they were like putting them to like previous, like I think they did like Rhea Ripley and Becky Lynch to like Big Time by Peter Gabriel, and then they did like the tag team main event for WrestleMania 40 to like to I forgot what it was, like Ladies and Gentlemen by Saliva. So they took like previous WrestleMania theme songs, but like the package or like the moving graphic, but they put like My Way from Limp Bizkit under like Cody and Roman Reigns, that kind of stuff. And I like that, and I thought Rock and Cena loved it. I will say, we talked about Undertaker and that one change we'd make. WrestleMania 29, I'd make it Rock, CM Punk, and Cena in a triple threat match in your main event. That way that WrestleMania 28 could have preserved its once in a lifetime status, right? It could have stayed that way. It could have preserved that status as once in a lifetime. And then WrestleMania 29, we could have got The Rock again, but in a different way. You know what I mean? It's kind of the way we're doing WrestleMania this year, right? We're not just getting a rematch on night one. We're getting like the tag team match and the match. We're not doing it twice. We're not doing the rematch. We're not doing that kind of thing. So to preserve WrestleMania 28's status as once in a lifetime, and then to also still give us Rock and Cena again, it would have been good to have it like a triple threat. So we're seeing like a different dynamic. We're seeing something different. We're not just literally seeing it repackaged. And what I would have loved about WrestleMania 29 is it would have thrown somebody in there to kind of convolute who's going to win, because obviously the second time around we knew who was going to win. CM Punk could have been that wild card of like, well, maybe he's winning, right? Maybe he's leaving with the belt, like similar to WrestleMania 31 with Seth Rollins, right? Cashing in Money in the Bank, right? It could have been like, well, I know Rock's not going to leave with the title, but so it's going to be Cena, or it could be Punk, like, you know what I mean? And they both had like, it would have been a way better build too, because Punk obviously had his animosity with The Rock and returning and taking the belt from him that he had been working for and holding for the better part of 2 years, right? So he had the animosity, right? And obviously we know in 2011 the fight between John Cena and CM Punk, and that whole summer of Punk where he was kind of being the anti-establishment towards the generic Fruity Pebbles John Cena. So having CM Punk as kind of that like kink, that kind of screw right in the middle of things, that's like, hey, sorry to like rain on your Hollywood parade guys, but real wrestlers are here. That would have just been a great dynamic between the real wrestler CM Punk, the anti-establishment, and then the Hollywood stars like John Cena and Rock. Kind of
cool. That would have been cool. Yeah.
That would have been cool. I would have liked that. But WrestleMania 22, I'm going to say is my favorite WrestleMania from that decade. Shawn Michaels and Undertaker, WrestleMania 25. Going to say that's my favorite match from that decade, clearly. I'm going to say WrestleMania 27. You started it off. I'm going to say definitely that I agree. Worst WrestleMania of that decade. I wasn't a huge fan of 21. It did have the Money in the Bank match. I did like that, and I did like Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels. But I just thought, obviously, the crowning of Batista and John Cena in back-to-back matches seemed like a little too much. Like, I was just like, I already know the result of the next 1 hour of wrestling. Like, the last 1 hour of WrestleMania was those two matches, and it's like, I already know the result of both of these. And it kind of was that WrestleMania. It's what made me love Roman Reigns winning against Cody Rhodes last year, because of WrestleManias like WrestleMania 21, where it literally is those guys won the Rumble. They're going to beat the bad guys. That's what you're going to expect, like the predictable thing. Obviously, Daniel Bryan was a little more different, but everything else, you're right. It's like he won the Royal Rumble, so clearly he's going to win the belt. They're going to achieve what they've achieved. Like, it's just like there's no way Triple H is leaving WrestleMania 21 with the belt. There's no way JBL is leaving WrestleMania with the belt, right? Of all things, JBL is not leaving WrestleMania with the championship. That would have been the shock of a lifetime. You know what I mean? So, like, it was just kind of it's similar to like when we see matches now where, like, back in the day when like the Undertaker took on Mark Henry at WrestleMania, and you're like, well, I don't think Mark Henry is going to be the one ending the streak. Yeah. Or, you know what I mean? It was like Hardcore Holly versus Brock Lesnar for the championship, or what we just saw at Elimination Chamber here in 2024, where you're like, yeah, I don't think Nia Jax in Australia is derailing Rhea Ripley's WrestleMania plans in front of her home crowd.
It wasn't a match. It wasn't.
Yeah, but it's just like super predictable things,
well,
right?
Hey, there was one unpredictability that was that factor in that match. For me, put my money on it. I'd say that was probably Nia Jax's best performance in her WWE reign.
Well, yes. But yeah, obviously, like when Rhea Ripley and Nia Jax were main eventing that pay per view, we were like, okay, we don't really need to watch
Well,
this to know
yeah.
what's going to happen. So
Yeah,
it was
we
like
knew
the
the
whole
result.
last hour of WrestleMania 21. We had back to back matches where bad guys. At least Triple H was a good competitor. I mean, JBL. I mean, let's be fair. He had a decent run, right? But he's not leaving WrestleMania as a champion. I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't know outside of the APA tag team era. I don't know what match that he left WrestleMania as a victor, kind of thing. I think he might have beat Finley at like WrestleMania 24, the kickoff match.
I can't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, other than that, like JBL, like, he is like that typical bad guy in wrestling that's never going to be the bad guy like a Roddy Piper or a Triple H, who is going to be a bad guy but also victorious. You know what I mean? Like we have Roman Reigns, who's a bad guy but also wins. JBL was like a bad guy who would win at No Way Out just to set up the bigger loss at WrestleMania. That's what JBL was there for. I was even surprised he ever held the belt to begin with. But hey, I thought it was a decent decade, and obviously ending with streaming. And I will say one thing, WrestleMania 30, great WrestleMania, and the biggest thing about it was the biggest shock for WrestleMania 30 to me wasn't the streak ending, wasn't any of that, was the fact that it delivered like a great WrestleMania. And I was very skeptical because we're moving into an era where WrestleMania went from $50 at the start of this decade to free at the end of the decade to new subscribers, right? And $9.99 at the most, right? I was expecting, like, because this has never been done before, I was expecting the WWE, right? We all remember the era where they pulled out the pyro. I was expecting WrestleMania to be like, well, this is not going to be the WrestleManias like we've expected because they don't have to sell it anymore. They don't have to get me to buy WrestleMania. I already bought it. They can put out No Way Out and it's WrestleMania. What am I going to do about it? And the fact that they put out a WrestleMania that was worthy of a $69.99 pay-per-view buy, right, showed me like some confidence in what we now have today. Because I was very skeptical going into WrestleMania 30. I was like, really? Like, we're going to go from paying $50 a year to watch WrestleMania, or in some cases in HD, upwards of $100 to free, essentially? Like, we're not getting like millions of dollars worth of pyro. We're not. No. Like, they're going to definitely scale back on these pay-per-views. They're not going to give us like something that they have to sell us. They're not going to give us a $40 show. They're going to give us a $10 show.
Well, they did.
But I was pleasantly surprised, right? And WrestleMania has never missed a beat since. So I will definitely say, it was an interesting era, and I'm glad that it ended. WrestleMania 30, the start of the streaming era, and it's crazy to think how long it's been now since we've paid money to watch WWE.
Facts.